back to our next panelist. Actually, it's very difficult for me to decide which of his roles justify his persona most appropriately. But listening to him speak on contemporary agricultural issues has always been very hard-hitting and enlightening. A scientist in plant breeding and genetics, a distinguished food and trade policy analyst, an award-winning Indian journalist, writer, thinker, researcher. Okay, friends, I have the proud privilege of inviting Shri Devendra Sharma to share his vision on how agroecology is going to be the future for India. Devendra, sir.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Mamta Jain, for this excellent introduction, because normally when I tweet in the morning, I'm used to facing an array of trolls every morning. But I'm so happy to hear some good words from you. And
pleasure is ours, sir.
Like everyone else, I would like to join to congratulate Professor Ratan Lal for this great honor. And as Indians, as fellow Indians, I'm sure we feel all proud of his achievement. And I am particularly very happy because this was, of course, my first interaction with Professor Ratan Lal, but a number of luminaries who won the World Food Prize are personally known to me or have had the pleasure of interacting with him, and I think they're all great minds. And I'm so delighted that Professor Ratan Lal has brought focus onto a subject which we always thought was freely available. We always thought it is of no consequence. And as a student of agriculture, I think about 3 to 4 decades earlier, I always used to question that why is the importance of soil not woven in the way it should be woven in, the kind of policy direction that eventually it requires, which Professor Ratan Lal has spelled out so good and so clearly before us today. I think that is where the entire focus of the society should have been, to conserve soil, to ensure that what we grow is not devoid of soil nutrients and so on. But unfortunately, that did not happen. And I'm sure the award that Professor Ratan Lal has won will perhaps draw attention of policymakers to a subject, I would say. His wonderful, suggestions as to how we can bring soil health back into action. I think I'd just like to add one to that, and I hope Professor Ratan Lal would agree with me that, the way we have been protecting tigers, we have a Project Tiger. We spent all our effort to protect tigers, which was remarkable. I think we need a Project Soil Health. We need, on the same pattern, a Project Soil Health, which draws from what Professor has just spelled out for all of us to ensure that we give to the soil what we draw out from the soil, as he very rightly mentioned. Now, that, I think, is something that we must focus on. And I think moving away from that particular message that Professor Ratan Lal has given us, let's look at where the world is moving and where we are standing, or we are at the crossroads today. We all know that globally, agriculture is, of course, as Norman Borlaug very proudly used to say, that farmers are feeding the world. Yes, they are doing it, and they are doing it remarkably well, because the food that we produce today is good enough to provide twice the kind of requirement that the planet has, is already being met by farmers, which means, the population is, let's say, 7.5 billion. We already produce food for about 14 billion people. So I think farmers have done remarkably well, and they need all appreciation for that. But also at the same time, we know that roughly about 1/3 of the food that we produce goes waste, and it goes into landfills and so on, and much of it is, of course, adding on to the greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that if food wastage was a country, then it would have been third in the category, third in the ranking globally, as far as global warming, global greenhouse gas emissions are concerned. So I think that's something, definitely a focus that we should, drive attention to, or the policymakers should focus on. But having said that, I think we are also very clear that globally today, agriculture has a much bigger contribution to the climate change impact that we are witnessing today. And I think that is where we need to really now formulate our policies to see, are we heading in the right direction or not? There was a time, yes, when we perhaps needed intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture has lasted for last 4, 5, 6, 7 decades. And we have seen that two things happening very clearly. One, of course, the nature is being devastated, biodiversity becoming extinct. We know what is happening to soil. We know what is happening to the groundwater. We know what is happening to the air contamination, air pollution, what is happening to the oceans and so on and so forth. But I think what we are reluctant or we are not standing up to really call the shots here is how do we transform, how do we move from intensive agriculture to agroecological agriculture? Because to my understanding, that is the future. The world will have to move in that direction sooner or later. And it has already started moving. But that gives us a lot of happiness that we are on the right track. Why I'm saying this is because I just read a report by Nielsen. And Nielsen tells us very clearly that in the last 4 or 5 months since January, the sale of organic food and wines in London or in England has been 3 times than what was normally expected. Now this environment of coronavirus and this COVID-19 plus, I think is giving people an understanding that playing with nature is not the way forward, and I think food is one category that they would like to focus on. So most of the effort now is going to procure or to get across to sources from where we can get non-chemically produced food, which I think is a very, very positive development that is taking place. But I think at the same time, it needs a policy direction, something that it imbibes, or as you rightly said in the beginning, Mamta, that we need to go back to the basics. And I think when we say going back to the basics, it does not mean going back into the cave age. What we actually need is we need to go into the new agriculture. And new agriculture this time is the agroecological agriculture, where we don't add to the environmental contamination or environmental pollution. We don't bring in unnecessary genetically modified crops or go on spraying pesticides and so on and so forth. I remember when I was a young student, I'm talking of the 70s, mid-70s, Professor David Pimentel, I still remember his name, of the Cornell University at that time, had come out with a paper. He had said that 99.9% pesticides go into environment. Only 0.01% pesticides hits the target pest. I thought that was a good enough warning for agriculture scientists to focus on, that we could perhaps come up with an alternatives to chemical pesticides if 99.9% are going into the environment. But surprisingly, nothing like that happened. In fact, the pesticide usage continues to go up, and we are being told there is no way out, it is inevitable, we have to suffer the losses, suffer the consequences, and so on and so forth. But I'm so happy that globally now, there's enough evidence to show us that another world is possible. And that, of course, started with the global study by IAASTD, the International Agricultural Assessment, which has been some years. And I remember my friend Hans Herren getting a World Food Prize, not for that study, but otherwise. And he was co-chairing that particular report. And I think that report had very clearly said that business as usual is not the way forward. We need to really transform. And in that connection, when I look at a recent report which tells us very clearly that out of the $700 billion that are being pumped in to grow agriculture, to cultivate crops and so on, only 1% goes for organic agriculture. Now, that's a huge, huge gap. 1% doesn't even matter when I look at the $700 billion going in for the kind of chemical agriculture or the kind of intensive farming the world is pushing. I think that needs to change, and that would only change if there is a policy direction for that, if there is a policy space being provided for that. The other suggestion that Professor gave us very, very rightly said about the stubble burning issue, he said farmer needs to be incentivized. Now, I must tell Professor that, you know, in India, farmers have been actually saying that they can manage this huge surplus, you know, they know how to manage it if the government is willing to give them a additional incentive, which they were saying is 200 rupees per quintal is what they require. And look at it, Supreme Court had last year even said that yes, state government should provide 100 rupees per quintal as an incentive to farmers to manage this stubble. That of course is huge quantity, huge volume as we know. But look, we are into the season and the governments are not even doing that. The governments have no money. They say the state governments pass on the buck to the center passes on the buck to the state governments. And I'm sure by the time the harvesting season arrives, we will see ourselves in the same dire situation. The point I'm trying to make is when the farmers also understand the consequences of stubble burning, when the farmers also understand the consequences of, you know, guzzling of water because of the kind of flood irrigation we talk about and so on, why is the policy initiative not keeping pace with what the farmers demand? That is something I think we need to focus on, and that is where also comes the role of agricultural universities in perhaps not being able to assess as to what the wisdom that the people carried in this country we should have learned from them. I remember when I was a student, we were told lab to land, but I always thought we should have also had land to lab. You know, we need to learn from the farmers' wisdom also. Don't only think that we know what is best for farmers. I think farmers, I'm sure everyone would agree, know what is best for them. And I thought we lost an opportunity to learn from them. And here is now a system or an opportunity or a challenge before us to really go back to farming communities to learn from them. I just give you one example, Professor Ratan Lal. The Chhattisgarh government has come up with a program called Nerva, Gerva, Guruva and Bari. Now, if I translate that in English, it actually means water, it means cows, it means cattle, it means the backyard nutrition that that has to provide it, and of course talks about composting. So this was traditionally known. This was traditionally known, a traditional system, and now the Chhattisgarh government is trying to promote that system. And I'm sure we will all agree, if 70% of the households are very small, as far as the land area is concerned, that is the kind of traditional system or wisdom they need to draw back from. And I think I'm so happy that Chhattisgarh government is doing it. When I look at the Andhra Pradesh government in India, they have gone, for quite a number of years. They started with community managed sustainable agriculture, a remarkable system where they brought the communities together and to get away from the use of chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizer. Now they went into what is called zero budget natural farming, which has now been renamed as community managed natural agriculture, natural farming, and under which they intend to bring by 2024 all the farmers moving on to non-chemical agriculture. Now, if one state can aim at that, I see no reason why the rest of the country cannot emulate that example. And it's not only happening in India. A recent report has said that the European Union biodiversity strategy is now very clearly spelling out that by the year 2030, they intend to bring 25% of the cultivable land into organics, and for which they have made the targets also very clear. They want to reduce pesticide consumption by 50%, and they also want to reduce fertilizer consumption by about 20%. Now, these are the kinds of policy initiatives we require. But more importantly, I'm sure Professor would agree with us, and everyone else would also agree, that what is more needed, what is needed more, and which has been ignored, while the emphasis has been on productivity, no one has talked about farmers' income. No one has talked about farmers' income, despite farmers producing, such a bumper harvest year after year, whether in America, India, or wherever. We realize farmers are in a terrible, terrible distress. Look at America. Look at America. Look at Europe. Look at America. When I say the American Farm Bureau Federation has come out with a study which says very clearly that 91% farmers are faced with bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy amount is $425 billion. And out of which 87% farmers say that they know they have to quit agriculture. Now, this is happening in a country where markets were operating. We always believe markets is the answer. Government of India has brought in 3 ordinances now, again saying there's a freedom to the farmers to sell. But if that freedom was so good, please tell me, why are American farmers dying? Why are European farmers also dying? Why agriculture in America and Europe has to be propped up by agricultural subsidies? We provide a subsidy support of $246 billion in 2018 to see that agriculture survives in that part of the world. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, why can't we make agriculture economically viable and profitable? I think perhaps I would end by saying, and what Professor Ratan Lal also suggested, that the ecosystem services approach is one way of ensuring that the farmers are adequately compensated for the kind of agroecological systems they follow, and also for the kinds of income they deserve. And if I look at the TEEB, the economics of ecosystem services of biodiversity, the UNEP program, I realized that agriculture, right from deforestation to the food wastage, is actually the greenhouse gas emissions from this kind of agriculture is roughly 49% to 57% of the total greenhouse gases emissions. That clearly tells us that the shift that we require today is to move from chemical to non-chemical agriculture. And let me be very sure that number of studies all over the world have shown that there would be no loss or drop in productivity. A recent study published in Nature magazine has said very clearly that China in the last few years has reduced the fertilizer intake by 15%. And in the case of the productivity of wheat, rice, and maize, the 3 cereal crops, has gone up by 11%. If China can do it by going for a mission mode kind of a program, I think we can also emulate, we can also follow the example. The world is now beginning to change. People are going to demand more of organic food, safe food, healthy food, and so on. And I think it is time to move away in that direction. And perhaps this is an opportunity which I think thanks to the award presented to Professor Ratan Lal for his remarkable achievements. And I think that will draw the global focus on how to produce safe food, healthy food, and nutritious food for the population. Is there a way forward now? I personally believe that the world is willing to move on to the next revolution. What Professor Swaminathan had called is the evergreen revolution. But I think that's a revolution which would this time be, the shots would be called not as much by farmers, but as much by consumers. If consumers start demanding that they need organic food, you will see that change happening very fast. And I think that's also a kind of a change that I'm expecting, because when I read the reports of Nielsen, which I said earlier, if the demand for organic foods is going up 3 times in United Kingdom, and I also know that in India the demand for organic food is growing also at a very fast pace. This is the kind of a change that the world requires. Let's be very clear. Much of the problem that the world faces environmentally, and I see that environmental footprint that Dr. Lal shared with us, and the answer lies in actually changing the kind of agriculture we have been doing, moving from chemical to non-chemical agriculture. And I think that is where I am sure we would all agree that agricultural universities have to now transform their agenda. Agricultural universities have to go beyond what they were doing all these years and have to move from that chemical or the base that the production base that they had created. They need to now move from fertilizer responsive varieties, from the pesticide responsive varieties and so on, to now organic breeding. They need to go on to organic breeding where we can bring in all those factors that Professor mentioned. And I think that is where we would require a kind of a revolution to happen. But agriculture universities have again to step out and to take a lead today as to what the world requires. And I think once the agriculture universities, the agriculture economists undergo a kind of a transformation or a kind of a change that the farmers in this world are waiting for, I think nothing can stop that. So with that, with this hope that this is the beginning of a new revolution, and I admire people like Professor Ratan Lal for standing up to their commitment and passion, and I think that is what the world requires. Thank you very much, Mamta. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. As I said earlier, your questions are certainly hitting hard, and again, saying bridging the gaps is going to be a crucial step in this whole scenario.